In our study of Sri Aurobindo's synthesis of yoga, we entered the chapter titled Oneness. And over the last few weeks, we have been dwelling upon what Sri Aurobindo has described as the full, complex and complete experience of oneness necessary in the integral yoga. In fact, he says, this realization of oneness and this practice of oneness in difference is the whole of the yoga. It is one thing to experience the oneness, but then to be able to perceive the differences in the oneness and put into practice the oneness in difference. When he says this practice of oneness, it refers to the few lines before where he has described the oneness and the extent of the scope of its experience in seeing the one divine in all things, but also to live, think, feel, will and act in that sense of unity in the individual life. And so the scope is practical to the detail. He then describes the way in which this is to be perceived, and in the last paragraph that we had read over the last few weeks, we saw the fullness of the sevenfold cosmos. The Sat, the Chit, Ananda, Supermind, mind, life and matter. The seven chords which make up the entire cosmos, through which the Supermind, the Satchidananda manifests itself as one being that becomes the whole cosmos. The vision before us laid out is one divine being, that is Satchidananda, sheer existence that is utterly consciousness and blissful, pouring out infinite possibilities, organizing infinite possibilities to form an ordered cosmos, playing within those infinite possibilities, differentiating each one of them and relating them to each other, and playing through influences across these possibilities, experiencing them in distinct forms. So this completes the full sevenfold play. Matter is the domain where form dominates. Everything that exists in the material world is distinguished by a form. Even force has a form. Even idea has a form. Otherwise it does not belong to this material world. A step behind, we see that matter itself is made up of whirling energy, whirling force. And force is not dependent on form. It casts itself into form, but lives free of form. Behind that we see mind, which is holding the idea around which the force whirls. And so this lower triple domains we saw last time are as if a reflection of Sat, Chit and Ananda and the Supermind. The sheer existence of the divine consciousness here in the domain of form becomes as if a base upon which all the rest of the play can work out. There is a fascinating chapter in the Life Divine to which we made allusion last time, the sevenfold chord of being, and the chapter before which describes the ascending series of substance. We'll perhaps take a look at this on some other occasion, where he describes how these seven principles are essential to form any cosmos. Anything which is a world where you can have some experiences in some kind of an order has to have these seven principles. And if it appears as if only one of these principles dominates, it only means the other six are hiding behind, concealed. So there are worlds in which, for example, in the domain of the life energies or mind, which can be experienced in your dream state or in an out-of-body experience, one of these principles dominates, the other principles are playing within that. In the life world, all is force, all is energy. Energy plays out in different forms, imaging itself in forms which are fluid, which change as we see in dream state. But there is an order, there is a play of all the other principles behind. And you can go on across the cosmos and find all these, every possibility of play between these 7 principles. But here, in the material world, something interesting happens. Within the dominant principle of form, that is matter, all the other principles are as if hidden. When you look at a rock, you cannot see the life that is in it. You cannot see the mind that is working behind it. At best, you may see some symptoms of it, because rock seems somehow to grow, to evolve, to change. Crystal in the rock has the ability to heal itself. You can even break and keep it together, and over time crystalline structures tend to regrow. A little bit of water can help speed up the process, but still there is a process in which clear, ordered arrangements appear. And you may say, this is like life, but it can't be living. When you see the geometric perfection of the crystalline structure, you will say, there is some kind of an as if thought out precision, mathematically perfect. There must be some kind of a mind, but it can't be thinking, obviously. But that's because mind and life are so well concealed that at best you see some symptom in the form. But Sri Aurobindo points out that they have to be there, otherwise it cannot exist. Rock cannot exist unless the other 6 principles are there. And if they are there hidden, eventually they have to creep out. They have to reveal themselves more and more. And so what is fascinating is, in the entire cosmos, you may have this play of the 7 principles, but here in the material world, you have the possibility of hiding and then slowly revealing. The movement of hiding, Sri Aurobindo calls involution, and the movement of revealing is what we have called evolution. Unfolding, unrolling. And that's what makes the material world so fascinating. Out of what seems to be a black box, a rock, nothing in it, everything grows. Eventually the plant emerges, eventually the animal develops, and the human thinking experience, and beyond that, all the way building as if step by step the bridge to the highest spiritual consciousness. And if you look at it in these terms, the material universe is struggling to unfold, unveil, discover all of its hidden secrets. In the Veda, this is imaged as the treasuries of the gods, the jewels hidden inside the rock, in the mountain, in the caves of inconscience. And from there, they have to be discovered, drawn out, and all the powers liberated. And this idea comes in so many different symbols in different traditions. But something concealed now revealing itself. And in the human being, we may say, the material universe's struggle to find itself and discover all its possibilities has reached the highest so far. But within us, there is the capacity now in that highest position to become conscious, this is the game, and then to consciously accelerate the game. The result is that it may take a few billion years to bring us to where we are, but from this point, it may take not more than a few years to complete the rest of the journey. The journey speeds up enormously from the point where the conscious, self-aware human being begins to lead or participate in the evolution. And this process is what we are looking at here. One can, through the means described across the last few chapters, awaken to this underlying oneness of the entire cosmos and the divine presence, and in the human body perceive the oneness in all the differences and participate in the play of the oneness. Experiencing the full spectrum of the seven principles across the cosmos, living not just in the material world through the physical senses, but looking at all those worlds through the higher perceptions of senses of the consciousness, seeing it all in one continuous spectrum. And yet there is a difference that still remains. There is a domain in the higher ranges where the divine is revealed, and this domain where things are still capable of concealment, and in many cases still concealed, even with the full awakening of the consciousness of oneness. And how are we then to relate these two? This is the theme of the paragraph we're taking up now. And we will see how, in practice, this vision of oneness can be nurtured in us by a sustained discipline in daily life. And it does not require a highly developed consciousness. We can begin where we are and grow into this experience. So here he begins thus: the integral yoga of knowledge has to recognize the double nature of this manifestation and to reconcile and unite the two in the oneness of the illumined realization. And what is this double nature? He explains: for there is the higher nature of Satchidananda, in which he is found, and the lower nature of mind, life and body, in which he is veiled. He is found, he is veiled, but it is still he in the full spectrum. And so once you accept the double nature, what do? To reconcile and unite the two in the oneness of the illumined realization. Reconcile because you cannot say this is a continuation of that, it is so different. But in the reconciliation you will see why it is different, and then you have to work to bridge. We have not to leave them separate so that we live a sort of double life, spiritual within or above, mental and material in our active and earthly living. Many traditions have accepted this compromise that you can be within in some consciousness, spiritually based, and then the rest of the machinery of your nature, well, it does what it does. And sages, great spiritual sages, having accepted this as an ideal, have behaved often in their mind and body in ways that are unacceptable in even civilized society. Flying into rage, throwing great tantrums. And they said, well, it doesn't matter because this is the way the body and the mind and nature work. I live in my oneness. The body works, the mind works in this lesser reality, and that's all. But this is not acceptable to us, as we've seen. We cannot live in a double consciousness. We have to review and remold the lower living in the light, force and joy of the higher reality. Review and remold the lower living. So first there is a change of perspective. You have to understand why the physical body is the way it is in the light of that. If the origin is in the Satchidananda, why is it that the body is so dull, insensitive, unconscious? What purpose does it serve in terms of that, for that? What purpose does your life energy and its impulsions serve in relation to the Satchidananda? What can the Satchidananda do through this? And in the same way, your mind and its power of thought, however limited, however ignorant and confused, what is its purpose in relation to the Satchidananda? You have to first review. Once you have reviewed, you can remold. And so you recognize that this is the relation which is meant to be, and now you reshape these things. So that more and more the Satchidananda can connect and express itself through the mind, through the life, through the body. So in the next 3 sentences, he describes the review process. How are you to see these things? And then along with the review comes what you have to do. First, he says, when you remold, he puts it in relation to the light, force and joy of the higher reality. So first we will ask ourselves, what is this light, force and joy? Joy, perhaps, yes, the higher worlds must be joyful. That makes sense. Force, some higher force, what does that mean? We're not too sure. And what does it mean for the higher light? When the human consciousness looks up at the realms of the Satchidananda, the way it perceives them, first is light. I recall one of our friends who at a late age had some medical problems, and while in the hospital her blood pressure began to drop rapidly and they had to resuscitate her practically. She came back, and then her memory of that event was, as she was drifting off, freed of the body consciousness, she saw light, immense light. This is a common experience among those who have been through what we call near-death experiences. But it is also a common experience for those who enter deep into meditation, where you enter a consciousness that is freed from the physical body, and entering something which is deeper or higher, there is the perception of light. But not through the physical sight, not through the physical biology. And so we have to understand, what is this light? In fact, Sri Aurobindo observes, physical light and the experience of physical light is a reflection of a great truth of the spiritual light. In reality, physical light is only a phenomenon taking place. What happens? We say, the light strikes the retina, triggers some electrical signals, it goes into the brain rearranges the electrical signals, interprets them, and you experience light or sight. But what are you experiencing? The brain creating an image from signals coming to it. You are not really seeing light. If somehow you were able to get free of this biological machinery and see directly, bypassing the dependence on the biology. Let's say now, your mind, which is finally seeing the picture of the world as it is, constructed by the signals coming through your eyes, your mind gets free of the brain and sees directly. What would it see? Not electrical signals, not things struck on the retina as photons. It would see the world for what it is, directly. And its experience would be not only sight, but it would see everything literally made of light. It's something of this that we experience sometimes in dream state. When in the dream state, you are aware of everything around you at the same time. If you've ever had conscious dreams, where you're conscious in the dream that you're dreaming, you notice you're not bound to the physical width of the eye's sight. In the physical world, you have to turn around to look at the back. But once you're free of this biology in the vital or mental body, you're aware of everything at the same time. You do not need to turn to look behind. You know what is behind you, you know what is all around you, even above and below. You are pure awareness turning and being aware. And this is closer to the direct sight. But as you go still higher into the worlds, you realize all is substance of awareness, light. And so something of that influence entering here in the physical body, the first effect we have is everything is so bright, light, clear. And we use this image spontaneously in our vocabulary when we say, I had a flash of an idea, flash of inspiration. Because literally in our thought we have the experience of something being revealed, lit up, when the intuition drops in. Anything of the higher consciousness entering, you feel suddenly lit up in the experience of a downpour of the spiritual consciousness leads you to feel suddenly light in weight, as if you're light floating, free, wide, but also in your awareness suddenly you see and think clearly. There is no confusion, there is no doubt, you know things for what they are, everything is lit up, so to say. So the reason he uses these three words, light, force and joy, because the entry from above, in the mind particularly, is perceived as awareness, increased to the point where it feels as if lit up. Second, force. When that same consciousness descends, what it does is it intensifies everything. Not only your power of perception, but your power of action. So when a person is inspired, what happens? You're able to do so much more. You're able to do things which you could not have done before. Sometimes even expressing skills that you didn't know you had. Because there is a power that can lead and make happen, and that's the force, the second aspect. And the third is joy. When that descends, you suddenly feel uplifted, you feel spontaneously happy for no reason. That's the way you are. And what you will recognize over time is that the true nature of things is this joy. To be unhappy is more like a pretense of joy. Because when you're unhappy, observe the nature of unhappiness. You are happy to be unhappy. You enjoy wallowing in self-pity. You enjoy to feel depressed. So what you're seeing is actually a kind of a joy behind that is pretending not to be joy and enjoying the fact that it is not joy. And when you find somebody who's bound in that, it's very difficult to get them out of it because they're enjoying it. And you have to say, all right, since you want to enjoy unhappiness, keep at it until you get tired, and then we will move forward. And which also happens. After a while, when the pretense is no more interesting, you cannot draw attention to yourself anymore. All right. And then the mask drops and the joy returns. So that light, force and joy are the way in which we experience the descent of anything higher into our consciousness. And they correspond to the nature of the Satchidananda, the pure consciousness, and then the power of the consciousness, and the Ananda of the Satchidananda, but enormously diluted and reflected. So anything descending from above, the light, force and joy working in us will reshape, remold all this. So first step in our review, before we remold, we have to realize matter, capital M, meaning all materiality in the whole universe, the whole material domain. We have to realize matter as a sense-created mold of spirit, a vehicle for all manifestation of the light, force and joy of Satchidananda in the highest conditions of terrestrial being and activity. So this needs some elaboration because the message has many layers. First, we have to realize, not just to see, but through seeing, eventually it has to become a realization. That matter is a sense-created mold of spirit. Meaning, your senses have created the appearance of a form. But a form of what? Actually, what is inside is spirit. So let's take an example. You look at the glass and your sight, catching reflected rays of light, constructs in your mind the shape of the glass. Your finger now reaches out and touches, and on the fingertips, the nerve endings, through the contact they have with whatever is there, send signals which allows you to create the image of liquid, soft. It yields to pressure, it feels wet. But if you think about it, if your senses were confused, they could even say this is hot. Under hypnosis, for example, one can put in a suggestion which interferes not with the physical sense here, but with the mechanism of the transmission. If you go deep into hypnosis, you can even interfere with the physical senses at the cells or the nerves right there in the fingertip, where you touch an object that is actually cold and you will experience it as hot. You can reprogram to mix colors. The leaves would appear red. Something which is white will appear green. And the person will actually experience the world like this until the command is given and the perception returned. How do we know we are not all equally hypnotized to experience the world for the way it appears to be? Do we even have a way of knowing? In fact, we are hypnotized, but we are in a shared hypnosis. And that's why we all say, yes, this looks like transparent water. But the shared hypnosis is part of the collective mind out of which our individual minds are formed. So it's as if in the collective mind there is a perception of glass, water, red flower. Our minds, being parts of the collective mind, look through and experience glass, water, flower. And that's why we have a shared experience of this. Every once in a while, something is broken in the biology, and somebody, for example, cannot distinguish between red and green because the content of the information going through the retina is somehow reduced. But that's about it. But we are in a shared hypnosis. When the hypnosis is really removed, what would we see? We would see here the presence of spirit, divine, self-aware consciousness, expressing itself or looking at itself as glass, water, flower. We would still enjoy the glass, water and flower, but we would see it for what it actually is, the divine consciousness, the one divine becoming glass or conceiving of itself as glass and water and flower. So in fact, when we begin to wake up from the hypnosis, that's the process of the consciousness awakening, we look at the world and we begin to see things very differently. I dare say every one of us has had moments where we were more awake. And at that time you look at the world and everything looks so happy, beautiful, meaningful, even some sense of something sacred, as if the world is conscious and there's a secret meaning behind. You know you're here for a purpose, although you do not know what. And everything is suddenly as if more alive, more true, more beautiful. And then somehow that passes and we come back to our normal hypnosis where we are mechanically working and doing things. The evidence of this is very simple. In a single day, typical person breathes some 51,000 times. It's a movement happening right now. You are fully identified with your body consciousness. Your breath is one of the most essential components which you are capable of being conscious, without which you wouldn't be alive. But how many times did you breathe consciously in the whole day today? How many times were you actually conscious and taking a breath consciously? Probably not even once. Only if somehow the breathing is blocked, your attention would be drawn to it, even not by your choice, by the body pulling your attention, by a suffocating sensation, and you would breathe hard. And this is the same way in which our thoughts and emotions are working mechanically, as if hypnotized. The only thing of which we are conscious is an immediate impact of what comes through the senses. And if there is any danger, it calls more attention or less. Otherwise, we are literally living like half asleep, somnambulist, sleepwalkers. And that's why we are what we are, and our behavior is what it is. The moment we become a little conscious of our thoughts, emotions, or even our sensations, we begin to be able to modify them. So I'm thinking, but my thinking is confused. I'm feeling, but my emotions are currently troubled. And you can say, but I don't want to be troubled. And you can exercise your will. You can exercise your thought, control your thought, redirect your thought. But the same can be done with your sensations. As you begin to do that, you recast your perception of the world. Everything changes accordingly. If my thoughts are currently going through a line which is depressive and emotions are following, everything seems dull. The food I eat tastes dull because I am dull. When I wake up, become conscious, aware, everything becomes brighter, clearer, more interesting. So it's a small variation, but just that is enough to shift everything. What happens if you take this variation a little further? Beyond the sense-created mold, in your own consciousness now you begin to think of and perceive everything as containers, forms through which the one divine is expressing itself in various ways. And if you dwell upon this idea, if you spend some time every day consciously reorienting your thinking, you are undoing the hypnosis and beginning to see things for what they are. When you approach a sacred space, let's say you're approaching the Matra Mandir or the Samadhi or any space that is an object that is for you sacred, something like this begins to happen. You start thinking differently. This is a special place. As a result, your consciousness begins to turn, become more aware. And then you're able to be more receptive. There are occasions when we know of people who came with no expectation. But the impact of the space, of course, awakened something. But if you go with awareness, you immediately begin to sense more. So the first step is how you look at things of the world. If everything is simply objects which happen to be there, you don't know how, you don't know why, well, this is what you do. Think of each thing as a sacred form in which the divine expresses itself and begin to see it differently. So we have to realize matter as a sense-created mold of spirit, not just a mold. And then what does the mold do? A vehicle for all manifestation of the light, force and joy of Satchidananda. The mold becomes a vehicle. It's not just something which is static. Through it, something has to be done. And what? The light, force and joy of the Satchidananda has to begin to manifest. When you drink the water, you think of it as Satchidananda pouring as water. Satchidananda as the taste on your tongue. Satchidananda as the nourishment that fills your body. You take food and enjoy it. The hypnotized person will say, "Oh, yum, give me more." I once had this, it's very interesting to watch a dog when you give it a little bit of ice cream. It is so thrilled, so excited, it cannot control itself. And I watched this dog literally licking to the last drop, but with such force that the plate was banging. He was so thrilled. Not too different from a human being when it is strongly attracted in the hypnotized state. But in the more awake state, you'll take the same ice cream, you'll taste a little bit, and you'll say, "Yum." This is how the divine expresses itself in taste, in form, in colors, in touch, in one of the ways in which it can be enjoyed. So, in every object, we see the possibility of a greater emergence of light, force and joy of Satchidananda. To assist in that growth of the possibility is the purpose of this vehicle or this mold of the spirit. We ourselves, if you look at the human form, are molds through which this is happening. Our body is biologically not too different from the ape. What makes us different is the increase of the light, force and joy of Satchidananda. The light increasing makes us think. The force increasing makes us act. But to express Satchidananda. And the joy that we are able to experience and express is far greater than the ape. The vehicle is not too different, but the increase of these three in us through the vehicle is what makes for the human being worthwhile. And within the human, the vehicle is now plastic enough that it can go very far, even all the way to expressing Satchidananda, without needing to biologically change. It is plastic enough. But the fact of making that effort is what makes this vehicle worthwhile, fulfills it. And this would apply to everything. The table itself has been molded out of wood. Something increased in the light, force and joy of Satchidananda in what it expresses. The same wood left for what it is would eventually rot and break down. Recast, it expresses a greater possibility. In the material world, everything is a mold, and as a mold it becomes a vehicle for an increased expression of Satchidananda. And all material development, including technological development, is nothing but this evolutionary expression of increasing light, force and joy. You have taken a grain of sand, melted it, modified it until it becomes a computer chip and becomes a mobile phone. At the core of it is the chip, which is melted sand. At the surface of it is glass, which is also melted sand. Everything is modified sand. But what does it express? So much more light, force and joy, isn't it? And that is the sense of evolution itself. So we can look at it on so many levels, but the whole sense of the material world is forms, vehicles through which that which is concealed can reveal itself more and more. A time will come, and it's already fast approaching in some of the skills of technology, that we are able to literally draw out anything out of this raw base of matter. Make it do anything. Even express translucency on the computer screen, the colors that it can express. Mother foresaw this in her, not only in her vision, but in the very inevitability of material development. This was in the 50s. As an artist, she was speaking to the ashram children as well as the artists. She said, the colors of the subtle world are so much more rich. Not only more rich, but they are translucent, they glow. And physical paints are so dull, insipid compared to them. But then she looks ahead and she says, but a means will be found to be able to replicate that. Now, you try to paint, you can get something, but when you put it on the computer screen, there is this glow which is difficult to recreate with paint. And typically screens today go into millions of colors. But this ability to glow is very similar to what you see in the subtle worlds. If you've seen the movie called Avatar, you saw there the recreation of a world where plants are glowing, objects are giving off light, they are almost translucent and glowing. It's very similar to the domains of the subtle physical worlds. And you can visit them in your subtle body or in dream states, but they are very tangible. Slightly shifted from the physical, and you can enter into these worlds. And sometimes they are quite fascinating. You can, for example, approach a mountain, which is a rock, drill into it, you find nothing. But you shift a little bit, and in the subtle physical world, an entire city is hidden there. And things which glow. And the whole perception is very similar to the Avatar movies. And that's why that movie was so captivating, because it transcribes a glimpse of something which we sense exists, but we cannot see physically. But increasingly, as material substance becomes awakened to the spirit, this will be its normal form. What we are seeing today of the flowers is just the beginning of the flower evolution. The flowers will give off a glow of light as they evolve further, become more and more expressive of their full potential. And the same for everything in matter. Well, if we begin to look at the world in this way, that everything is a vehicle, Satchidananda hidden, working to reveal itself. Our actions in the material world working to reveal Satchidananda. You come into a room where everything is in a clutter. You rearrange the room and suddenly the whole space glows with what? Light, force and joy. It's as if everything is happy somehow. You can feel it in the substance. What did you do? You simply arranged it, rearranged it, brought it into order, and suddenly the space glows. And we've experienced this in our own home. How does that happen? That's the concealed Satchidananda, covered up by chaos, now more revealed in the order. So the way it works is sometimes quite subtle, but very tangible. A space which is chaotic radiates chaos. A space which is ordered radiates order, and you can feel it. Often you walk into, this is the fact in many spaces in India, you walk into a government office, you can feel the burden of the clutter, the junk piled up over years, decades, in chaos. You go into a different office where things are ordered, you enter the space and you can feel, yes, here things are thriving, the energy is flowing, everything is bright, clear, lit up. This will go places. Where there's this burden of a backlog and heaviness and dullness and cobwebs, it's not going to move, it's stuck, it's jammed up, it needs to be broken up in order to move forward. That feeling is there in the space itself. And when you enter the space, you are sucked into its imprint. Evolution of that space would be the increasing light, force and joy, meaning Satchidananda revealed, and then you know this is going to move forward. Its destiny is the result of where it is at or what it holds in consciousness. So on many levels, in many ways, but everything in the material domain is mold, meant to become a vehicle to reveal Satchidananda. In the highest conditions of terrestrial being and activity, how far can you take it? What is the highest condition in which this can go? And it can go all the way. Next, we look at life. Life not just as an activity taking place in the biology, but the energy itself which fills the whole universe, which is the basis for all activity, not just your biology, but everything. We have to see life as a channel for the infinite force, divine, and break the barrier of a sense-created and mind-created farness and division from it, so that the divine power may take possession of and direct and change all our activities, until our vitality transfigured ceases in the end to be the limited life force which now supports mind and body, and become a figure of the all-blissful conscious force of Satchidananda. So again, it's a long thing with many ideas. First of all, life as a channel for the infinite force, divine. What is life essentially? If you look at energy, which is the form in which we perceive life here, from a purely physical perspective, physics tells us that this energy is enormous, infinite, and we have mentioned this before. In a very little empty space, there is enough potential energy to evaporate all the oceans of the earth instantly. What is that energy doing? Moving. It's always in movement. But when the movement repeats itself, it looks as if it is static. You look at an atom, and what you see is whirling energy at a stupendous speed. So fast you cannot even measure it. And at that speed, the movement repeating itself appears from outside like a stable atom. But actually everything is in intense, incalculable movement of energy. This is the true nature of life. So life here is a channel for the infinite force. The force itself is infinite and therefore able to do this stupendous movement of whirling. This little piece of wood has billions of tiny whirlings, all at a stupendous energy. You release a few of them, 5 or 6 of the atoms entirely, meaning release them fully, and you would have a massive atomic explosion. What is an atom bomb after all? A few atoms which have been released to become pure energy. That's the kind of energy condensed into this. It looks funny, the flower smells good, looks good, tomorrow it will fade out and die. What's the power that holds it? Enough to create a supernova, exploding millions of stars. That's the kind of energy held in this single flower. What is it really? Energy. Infinite energy. And it is that infinite energy whirling which makes for the flower to be alive or dead, or pretending to be dead, except that it recasts itself and becomes a new substance later on. Everything is secretly alive. But the life revealed here is that energy. Life as a channel for the infinite force divine. It's not a mechanical force as we see it in the physics where we reduce it only to the materiality of the force, but it is conscious and divine. So we have to see life as a channel for the infinite force divine. Everywhere in the whole universe, the life energy is this. And, of course, we are conceiving it, but to see it, we have to break the barrier of a sense-created and mind-created farness and division from it. Our senses have created the division. This is, okay, a tiny bit of trickle of living life. We are not able to see that stupendous divine energy which is behind. Our mind gives it a small value. All right, how much will I sell it for? 1 rupee perhaps? That's the value that we have given it. What is its intrinsic value? 1 rupee is nothing. It's infinite energy which is pouring through. Intrinsic value in everything, in the divinity, is of course incalculable. But to be able to remove this veil that is created by your senses and your mind, to see things for what they actually are. You may still sell the flower or buy the flower for a rupee, but you know that what it is something infinite. So, you break the barriers of a sense-created and mind-created farness. As long as this barrier is there, the divinity is far. Where is divinity? Not here. I don't see it. But when you remove the veil, it is right here. In the flower, in the glass, in the water, in every atom, in everything, there is this concealed divinity. And the infinite force of that concealed divinity. And as increasingly one begins to feel and sense this presence, it allows the gap to close, and so that the divine power may take possession of and direct and change all our life activities. So increasingly as that gap is reduced, the action of the force begins to grow, flow, and the divine power takes possession of and direct the change of all our life activities. Until our vitality transfigured ceases in the end to be the limited life force which now supports mind and body, and becomes a figure of the all-blissful conscious force of Satchidananda. That is, in the form itself, the life now begins to reveal the all-blissful force of Satchidananda, which is what it was so far concealing, or through many reflections revealing a little bit of. The flower, through it, the all-blissful force of the Satchidananda may grow. But okay, that may take time, but within us, consciously, so much more can be done. Until, that means this is the end point. Towards it, we can begin the journey. In our daily life, when you put yourself in a relationship where the divine is far, the divine presence is at a distance. It is located somewhere in Pondicherry, sacred space, in Matre Mandir. You put yourself in a relationship of distance. When you remove these barriers, it is right here and right now. And increasingly, as we are able to do this, you will find a slight shift of intention and awareness, and you begin to feel the presence, because it is here. And as you begin to feel the presence, its action on you begins to grow. It begins to fill you. It begins then to shift your life behavior. You feel the joy, you feel the force, you can draw upon it. This is what happens when we we make some effort to call for help. One of the forms in which we do it is we ask for help through prayer. The moment you sit to concentrate for prayer, you see the first step is you conceive of something towards which you are praying. Some form or aspect of the divine. And second, you reach out with a call, meaning you create a bridge, a link, which reaches to that. So if I'm going to pray to the Divine Mother, first of all, before I can pray, I have to have a conception of the Divine Mother. And whatever it may be, however limited it may be, it's there. And where is it? Not there, here. Even if you conceive of it as something far away, at least in your conception, you have put yourself in relation. And then you make the link. And if in the link you bring the presence closer, as long as you're bounded to form, you have to go through that. If you don't bind it to form, you conceive of the Divine Mother here, filling the whole universe. She holds everything in herself, she pours herself into everything. Where is she? Here. And then you make the prayer. You will instantly begin to feel that vividness filling you. If you hold the conception of the Divine Mother in your heart and then make the prayer, then from inside you will be able to feel the warmth, the love, the joy, the presence glowing out. From outside, you will feel it penetrating you. From a distance, you will feel it growing closer to you. Your conception is the first link point, the channel, through which then you have to work to form the bridge. So start with the one divine presence everywhere, the one divine force filling everything. And then there you form the relation and deepen the contact. But you see, the principle is the same as prayer. But you need not go through a prayer-like process. You can simply become aware that everything here is filled with the divine. As an idea, into it you begin to bring the sense of closeness. And something of your heart, something of your mind begins to feel, touch, and feels the response. When you turn inward and from within you call, and it fills you from within, the practical effect is that it grows until the divine power may take possession of and direct and change all our life activities. So he's describing 3 stages. First, there is this taking possession of. Your heart is filled with this presence, this force, this light, this joy, whatever form it takes. And then from there it directs. The fact that you are happy or filled with that joy changes the form of your behavior. And increasingly as that happens or that settles and becomes permanent, the behavior is changed entirely. All our life activities, eventually everything. You may start with a few, but eventually it fills everything. There's no limit. What would bring the limit? Only is your conception. If you think of it as a power that can do only this much, well, you have put a limitation in what it can do and you call only for help for that. But if you ask for everything, eventually it can fill you. So the best conception for our purpose is to conceive of the divine energy filling everything, including every cell and every limb and every organ of your body. And in it awaken, in it increase. There's a very powerful formulation of this, which is in the mantra that was given for India's freedom. You know it as Vande Mataram, which used to be sung in the struggle for the freedom. After we won our freedom, we set aside the mantra and replaced it by a song which was sung in praise of King George V. And it was made the national anthem for some strange reason, which was more political. But Sri Aurobindo speaks of Vande Mataram as the mantra given for the liberation of India. And in this mantra, the person the Rishi invokes Mother India as an embodiment of the Divine Mother. And in one of the lines he says, Mother, in my arms you are the strength, Bahute tumima Shakti. In my heart you are the devotion, Hridaye tumima Bhakti. And he speaks of your light that fills my brain, my mind, to give it intelligence. And then says, your image, Mother, in temple and temple. Tumari pratima gauri mandire mandire. And what is the temple here? We, our form, our body. So, recall the earlier image, matter as mold of spirit, a vehicle for manifestation of Satchidananda. We are each one of us the temple for that. And you are the devotion in the heart, the strength in my being, the intelligence of my mind. And this is the temple in which I cherish you, I worship you, I give myself and serve you. And in every form is the temple. And you see the whole image shifts now. All is meant for embodying and expressing the divine. And in ourselves, because that is the way we look at ourselves, for the growth of the divine presence in us, for its strength, for its love, for its beauty, for its joy and light to grow in us. It's already there. It was only concealed. And in your becoming aware of it, you allow it to come forward. And then in your calling it, you draw it out and assist its emergence. And you can capture this movement as even the essence of the whole yogic process. Everything else is the same thing being done indirectly. In the prayer, you have imaged outside you and then made a partial temporary link. You stop praying and then the whole link fades out. But here within you, you make a link which is no more a prayer worded, but a conscious awareness and a self-giving and a joining and a merging. And as that grows, it grows until our vitality transfigured ceases in the end to be the limited life force which now supports mind and body and becomes a figure, form of the all blissful conscious force of Satchidananda. And that's the direction into which this movement culminates. And then the third step, which he describes, is we have similarly to change our sensational and emotional mentality into a play of the divine love and universal delight. And we have to surcharge the intellect which seeks to know and will in us with the light of the divine knowledge will, until it is transformed into a figure of that higher and sublime activity. So in two phrases in the sentence, he puts these two together. In the first, it was the sense of the matter. Second was life energy. But here there is the sensational, emotional mentality and then the intellect. So it is the mind domain, but it has two components. And this is important because they relate to the reflection of the Satchidananda in us. The intellect is a reflection of the supermind, the power, the creative power of the Satchidananda. But in our sensational and emotional mind, what we call the heart, we have the reflection of the Ananda principle of the Satchidananda, the delight principle, which forms the center of the nucleus of our individuality in what we call our soul. But the soul itself has poise. There is the outer superficial imitation soul, which Sri Aurobindo calls desire soul, and there is the inner or inmost true soul, which is the reflection or formation, literally form of Ananda. Because the inmost exists, therefore on the surface the desire soul can enjoy desire. Enjoy both fulfillment of desire as well as, even in a negative way, the denial of desire. It's similar to what we do when we are unhappy and we are happy to be unhappy. Similarly, when our desire is not fulfilled, we are enjoying an experience, but in a perverse way. When it is fulfilled, we are enjoying the experience in a different way. But the sense of enjoying life, simply to be alive, to be aware, to be able to experience, is a joy in itself. And that joy is felt in the emotional being. Even when you are most depressed or unhappy, you want to continue to live, you want to continue to fight. And you can do this because somewhere deep within in the true soul is the true delight, reflecting here in this enjoyment and wanting to be, to live, to overcome. So these are two different parts in us, but they all belong to general mind consciousness, awareness. So he puts it all in one sentence with two phrases. We have similarly to change our sensational and emotional mentality into a play of the divine love and universal delight. Love, capital L, delight, capital D, meaning it's not just the emotional, but something of the divine which is to be expressed. Change our sensational and emotional mentality, because right now the sensational and emotional mentality is not really looking for a divine love or a universal delight. It is looking for superficial or partial imitations of love and partial and fragmented delight. And let's appreciate the difference between the two and what makes for the difference. So, I like something. That's the partial form in which love is expressed. I like, therefore I need, therefore I want, and therefore I claim, therefore I possess, and then I make that possession exclusive. Now if you apply this to a human being, you will end up possessing a human being and suffocating the human being. Pretty much that's what happens in the animal life. When the snake says, a rat, I need a rat, I eat a rat, and then there's no more rat. It is absorbed. I give this example because Mother refers to this example. She says in the animal world, in the lower creation, love is expressed often by an absorption into the other. What is love really? It's the power of union. It is the underlying unity which reveals itself in the play of difference. And so in the lower forms of creation, it literally means you absorb the other and then the other ceases to be. And of course you need the next rat to eat up and so on. In the human consciousness, it's not too different. We need to possess. I like this, so I have to take it. And one of the forms in which this happens most easily is greed, physical greed for food. Take it and ingest. Once it's in, you're no more enjoying it. You're suffering because your stomach is overloaded and you can't enjoy. But these are crude expressions of love. Mother says if you go deep enough, you will find all relations really are forms, distorted, reflected, even perverted forms of love. But because love exists, the relations are possible. Because love exists, everything is held together. Even the atoms are bound together because of the love that exists in the atom, in the form of things, which pulls and holds them together. In a different way, in a different context, she describes how the universe is created. She says there's this first outburst, the flowing out, in which everything, all possibilities are thrown, including the possibility of refusing the oneness, refusing the divine and going against the divine. That possibility also is allowed because it's an expression of complete freedom. But then precisely because that possibility also exists, there has to be something to neutralize, and there's the second movement of the re-embracement of drawing the universe together in love. And because the universe has to be drawn back into its oneness, not merged into nothingness, but drawn back to play in the oneness, the power of love is greater than all other powers. It is the power by which the divine pulls everything into the oneness. And so the relationship here in our sensational and emotional mentality. Now these are very precise terms Sri Aurobindo uses. It's finally, emotions belong to the domain of awareness, mind. But the awareness itself is an energetic awareness. And similarly in the senses, the same thing plays out, reaches out through the senses to objects. So I feel in my heart, but through the senses I reach out in the feeling. And they're connected. I observe the flower and awakes in my emotions this feeling. So in both cases it is mind working through the senses and mind working through the energy of the emotions, but it is a mental awareness which is reaching out to take in and build relations. In the experience of the awakened, the purer form of the love, especially when the psychic influence comes forward, you suddenly realize that all these human relations are really shades or variations, often distorted, of colors of love. Including, there is this very interesting experience where somebody you used to hate earlier, now in the psychic influence you say, oh, this is the person I love to hate. What an interesting relation. But actually secretly the thing is love. But in the play, we will pretend at hating each other. And the feeling is very similar to what happens on the stage when I am going to do this to you, you are the enemy, and you pretend to hurt someone or hit someone. And everyone knows it's a play, it's a drama. And you enjoy the act of going through that. But it's at any point you can stop and say, all right, we've had enough of this play, let's change the play. Because you're free. And something like that is felt when this true love begins to express itself. You realize all the emotions were really distorted forms, shades, variations of color of the love. And that's the truth. So in the emotional mentality, in the sensational mentality, the play of the divine love and universal delight. And what makes for the love to be pure? When you recognize that it is the one divine in all things. What makes for the delight to be universal? When you recognize that it is one delight playing in all things. So the increasing sense of oneness, the underlying sense of oneness felt, is what transforms the fragmented or distorted human relations into the divine love, and the delight similarly becomes universal. And so let's explore this a little bit. We do things because we enjoy them. Otherwise we don't do them. And this sense of delight is inherent behind. Even what we call enjoyment is a distorted form of that. When I want something, I reach out to claim because I feel only by claiming this one thing I will have the joy. But if I recognize that the joy is inherent already without needing to claim, I look at the flower and it gives me joy. As long as I am here and flower is there, I need to claim it to fulfill my joy. When I am enlarged and the flower is already within my scope, then I'm already claiming it. Desire is an attempt to reach out to completeness. When I am this little piece of a person, I desire the flower to feel complete or happy. But when I am all this, I already have the flower and I can enjoy it. I do not need to bring it into me, it's already in me. So let's take the example of the owner of the palace. He owns all the flowers in his garden and he enjoys them. He can desire, covet something which is outside his palace, but in his palace, it's already his. And so he can look at everything and enjoy if he chooses to. But he does not, because now the desire is reaching out to what is missing. It's lacking completeness. So I must go and conquer territory outside my palace. But let's take it to its logical conclusion. Let's say you continue to conquer the entire universe. What happens now? Everything is yours already. What you don't need to conquer. You can look and enjoy because it's already yours. So practically this happens when in our consciousness we break out of my and not my, the little ego border we have formed, and enlarge or free our consciousness. We remove these barriers and experience wideness and experience the whole universe in our wideness as me. It's already me and everything in it is already mine in that larger awareness. And then you can enjoy the flower for what it is. You look at the flower and you enjoy its existence, which is already in you. You do not need to claim it to enjoy it. Something of this we do when we go window shopping. I already have a mobile phone that I bought last month. I don't need to buy another. But I need to go to the shop and see the latest models and all the flashy features, and I enjoy that. The fact that it exists is enough. I can enjoy it. I don't need to claim it and take it into my ambit. But this is what happens in the universalized consciousness. And that's when you can have the experience of the delight, the ananda of the Satchidananda. The nature of the divine ananda is that it is complete in itself, always revealing new colors, new facets of its bliss. But there is never a need for possessing, a need for claiming, or a lack, because it's already complete, but growing always in its richness. And so a person whose heart opens out in this way will look at the universe and say, what a beautiful, let's say, garden, playground, world, home. Everything is anyway your home. And you enjoy everything that exists for what it is, needing nothing at all. Everything is already there, yours. This is the very first verse of the Isha Upanishad leads you to this. All this is for the habitation of the Lord. Every tiniest universe within the whole universe. By that renounced, thou shouldst enjoy. Renouncing personal claim. And how do you renounce personal claim? By renouncing the sense of separation that is personal. And then you can enjoy truly. So we have to similarly change our sensational and emotional mentality into a play of the divine love and universal delight. And what it means in practice is literally you have to begin to see and feel in these terms. And you can start that as you are. If you can set aside a few minutes every day just for this purpose, as an exercise, every morning you get up, when you're a little fresh, you go to a point where you have a large view. If you're living on some floor, you go to your balcony and look out. Or look out of a window. Or in your mind's eye, look at everything of your world and the whole world, the earth and the universe. Open out to the infinity of the universe. And view it not as outside you. It is one divine, one consciousness, one being. Yourself Your body form only a part of this one. And dwell on this sense of the infinity and the oneness in which everything is held. And slowly bring this idea that all this is anyway yours. In the oneness. You need nothing, you lack nothing, therefore no need for a claim. Hold this idea, hold this feeling. It's literally reshaping from inside to what is already known and felt. And when you do this, you will feel a tremendous calm, a tremendous relief. Because it's the sense of lack which is the irritant, which creates an internal stress, which creates an imbalance because something is missing when you need to reach out, which you cannot ever get, and you know you cannot ever get. And so the dissatisfaction, all is built in. And when you accept this poise, suddenly there's a huge relief and a deep peace and a calm fills you. And then you enter the day with this. And every now and then you'll find over a period of time, this sense will pop up. When particularly something is bothering you, this sense will pop up, oh yes, it's already there. You still do what you have to do, but you are not driven by a lack. You're not driven by an anxiety. And the relationships will begin to change very quickly. Your sense of enjoyment and delight will begin to shift very quickly. And on the other side, which is the higher faculty of your mind, we have to surcharge the intellect which seeks to know and will in us with the light of the divine knowledge will. This is the part in you which is thinking and then willing. It wants to reach out to know and it wants to act according to what it knows. This is the nature of the intellect. As long as the intellect does not know everything, it keeps wanting to know more and more. Except the more it knows, the more it has to store information, it gives up at some point, or it forgets in order to be able to know more. When it wills, it wants to do, but in a space of no clear knowledge. I'm not sure what the consequence will be if I do this. I don't even know what is hiding behind the wall. When I break through the wall, I don't know what will happen. Literally, it takes this form. You do not know. You're always uncertain. And as a result, there is always, in the thought, this lack and anxiety. How can you change it? Well, you cannot wish to think out everything or know everything. What you can do is open your mind so that a more complete knowledge or a more complete awareness can fill it. So he says, surcharge the intellect with the light of the divine knowledge will. And then the seeking and the struggle to know and will is replaced by a spontaneous awareness which flows spontaneously into action. This is the nature of the intuitive consciousness. What it knows is what it acts. Now again, this is an experience we have all had at some point or other. You know and you begin to move in what you know and the thing is done perfectly. Think out, plan out, and then try to execute the plan, checking with the plan. You're always struggling between things. You often make a mess of it. And this is the way it works, especially when you're doing something which requires enormous skill and coordination. We had this example earlier of a gymnast. You have to be in the body, the movement that you're going to do, and the body just flows and does. And it's done perfectly. If while doing a cartwheel, you think, I have to pull my left leg a little more, stretch my right leg a little more, time my hands at 2.6 milliseconds, you can't do it. Because your mind is active trying to coordinate pieces, it does not happen. The only way you can do it is there is one movement that fills all pieces, holds all pieces in its oneness, and all of them move spontaneously in harmony with each other. Which cannot be done by thought-out process. It can be done by spontaneous, inspired movement, a single movement filling and leading. And so, how does this happen? Your mind first becomes quiet and opens out to something which is just above it, and it's not far. The intuition is not somewhere there, it's right here. It's concealed just behind the mental working. And so, when you make yourself very quiet, feel, simply be aware of what it is you wish to know. The more deep the silence, the more clear the perception, and the more clear, spontaneous the action. So before beginning any work, you pause, become very quiet and still. Align yourself to what is the intention that you wish. Invoke or ask for the help, the clarity, the inspiration, and then you wait. And at some point you will feel the initiation of the inspiration, and you let it lead. So this, you will recall, we have been discussing also last time, a couple of weeks ago, the means by which the intuitive knowledge is to be developed. And Sri Aurobindo lists 4 processes. The first is to train the mind to become silent and to stay silent at will. And the second is to shift the center of awareness, of thought, from here to just above the head. You literally shift your center here, you're more aware here than in the brain. Your mind immediately becomes more free, clear and wide, more supple also. But the third step, he says, wait for the inspiration to initiate action. And so, let's say take a simple exercise. You have to put sign with your signature on a check. If you mess it up, then the check will bounce. If you look at your signature on a paper and try to copy it, how well do you think it will work out? It won't match at all. The only way you can get your signature right is let it happen. But what do you let happen? If in the middle of the signature you say, oh, this line is too long, and you try to interfere, you break the flow, it gets distorted. How do you let it happen? You hold the pen and then you step out and let the hand do it. Interesting, isn't it? The same way the action which is inspired works. You hold the intention, align yourself, and then let it flow. And this increasingly with practice becomes more and more easy. You're doing it all the time when you're signing, but at that point the intuition is in the hand. The hand works, your mind steps out. But bit by bit, every part of your thought and action can be similarly aligned with the intuition. And the way is, let the light of that step just above the mind fill the mind and let it lead. Over time, as you begin to practice this more and more, you'll find a form of a groove. It cuts a channel, it enters, fills and shapes, begins to change things. You have to write a letter. You can just start writing mechanically, or you can hold the intention, pause, wait. And then you'll find spontaneously certain words forming. And you let the words flow as you write. Sometimes you won't even know the full form of the sentence. As the words form, you flow with it. And you'll be surprised, this ended so beautifully. I had not thought of it, but it formed. Okay, so there's in the mind, even in the emotions, in the energy flow, even in the body, in the action, the intuition which can flow through all these levels. And this, the process literally is experienced as a filling in more and more of the light. So surcharge the intellect which seeks to know and will in us with the light of the divine knowledge will. So it's not just the knowledge, it also carries with it spontaneously the ability to execute the knowledge. Until it is transformed into a figure of that higher and sublime activity. The intellect itself becomes as if a form of this higher grade of consciousness. Now you can see in all these 3 steps, perceive the forms as, he uses the word mold and then vehicle for manifesting Satchidananda. Life force itself as a channel for infinite force to work through us and in things, and our sensational emotional mind, vehicle for divine love and delight, and the intellectual mind as a vehicle for this light of the divine knowledge will. All four, let's say, parts of our being are potentially instruments for the upper four, Sat, Chit, Ananda, and the supermind. Because the lower is a reflection of the higher, each is naturally aligned to one of the higher principles. And the more we begin to see and perceive and act by that reality, the more those things begin to express and flow. And this is how the lower, which is concealed Satchidananda, begins to become revealed Satchidananda, which is nothing but evolution progressing faster, the yoga developing. Living here in mind, life, body, the reality and the realization of the Satchidananda above and its oneness expressed here in form. In one of the messages that the mother gave, which was given for the purpose of in the physical education, she actually in the framework of education in the ashram, she put forward this in a very pithy way. I don't have the exact quotation, but something very close to this. She said that the mind has to become a vehicle for the divine knowledge. Our life energy has to become a vehicle for the divine power. The body becomes a vehicle for the divine beauty and perfection, and our soul becomes a vehicle for the divine love. In sum, this is what he is describing here, but something in the same direction. This is the direction now set for our practice of bridging this upper and the lower half, so that the life itself can become an expression of the divine life. Now the full scope of this and the means for this will be the theme for the subsequent paragraphs, which we will take up only next time that we have the class, and that will be after a gap of 3 weeks. We will continue this on the Friday, that is July 13th. I'll be out of station in between. But pausing here, we'll review practically how we have to bring this sense of oneness into our life. We have seen some examples which we can take up as we are. But what you recognize is you are reshaping your thought values. The way you have been taught to look at the world was erroneous to begin with. As children, you were part of a complex social programming in which you were taught that you have to be protective, separate, afraid, divided. You have to look at the world in terms of possessions or lack of possessions, desires and needs. And entire civilizations have been built up on these wrong, distorted perceptions. Even today, in the management schools of the biggest names, even Harvard, they will teach you desire is your primary drive. You should desire more. You should never be satisfied. Because if you're satisfied, what will you do? You will stop growing. And so you have to desire and be dissatisfied and dissatisfied until eventually you collapse with a completely dissatisfied life. In the more ancient traditions, even in Europe, but now especially in the East, you'll find the advice given through the generations. Grandparents would tell the grandchildren, "My child, learn to be satisfied with what you have. And it's completely contrary to what's being taught in the Harvard school. Learn to be satisfied with what you have. And then you grow from satisfaction to greater satisfaction to greater satisfaction. And you have a life well lived. And satisfaction does not mean that you stop growing. Because the drive for growth is not desire. It is doing what's right. Dharma is one form it takes. Or in this case, assisting in the emergence of that divine possibility in everything, including in yourself. You grow because within you is this latent possibility which needs to be unfolded, which is what you came for. But externally in your life also, in everything, in the tiniest detail, you make things better because that is what brings forward the concealed divinity. And so your motive is not a lack, but the growing delight of fulfillment, of revealing divinity, and the joy which comes with each step of that revelation. So your basic motives are shifted. If from childhood we were given this kind of an orientation, hypnotic programming would be avoided, because the hypnotic programming is false. We've been taught to live by false values. And the truth of the deeper values does not need to be taught. It only needs to be encouraged, because it's already there within us. If from childhood you're asked to relate to that which you already know within, if you're asked to allow that deeper knowing to be your guide, then everything else becomes so much simpler. As adults, in the reshaping or retransitioning from this old erroneous values to the deeper truth, well, this passage that we have been reading is extremely valuable and extremely practical. Sri Aurobindo here does not give it the form of the practice. He is just telling you what needs to be done, but the forms of the practice you can vary in so many ways. In one of the forms you can take up, if you are more oriented to action, you do your work with the idea that your work is part of a larger universal flow of energy. What makes your body move and act to do this? Well, it is universal energy flowing through every form. And the energy flows into you, and through your work flows into other things. So if I'm doing physical work, manual work, I'm arranging, let's say I'm constructing a house. I lift the bricks and place them, I put the cement, I put another brick aligning. Who is doing the work in you? You did not get the energy. The energy was there, given to you, from whom? By nature. Behind nature, the divine energy, which is flowing in everything. And in you also. What can you do? In your mind, you can redirect the energy. I can place the brick this way or that way. But the energy itself is the divine energy working through so many forms. In the brick, it is the same energy whirling to hold the atoms together. In my muscles, to make them twitch so that I can lift. As it is working in my mind to modify my thoughts. Which is the highest expression of that energy? Which is the highest expression of the movement? And I align myself to that. And I do what is the best possible in the given circumstance. And if you are aware that the energy is flowing through you from the divine, where is it flowing to? Into the other things in their divine, in their hidden divinity. And so you realize you are only performing a service for the divine. In the things, in arranging the bricks, you are fulfilling their existence. In building the house, you are manifesting a possibility and a need, expressing the divine in a different way. And so your thought takes this direction, first of the big picture, putting yourself in the flow of the larger, and then fulfilling this divine principle in everything. So in a very practical, physical work, you bring this orientation and you can see the nature of the work would change so drastically. It would become a sacred task. And even if tomorrow the building you've constructed is not sold for a high price, that would not be your reference. It would be the work you have done. And you'll see almost in every spiritual tradition, some form of consecrated work is put. Even in the most monastic traditions, you'll find that still the work is to be done with some kind of consecration. But one can do it with much more than just that. In the same way, in your relations, you can rearrange, review, recast those relationships. Every human being you begin to see as a focal point of the divine, a soul in evolution. All of us equally children of the one divine mother. Whatever our superficial conflicts, differences, misunderstandings, miscommunications are also superficial. And I sometimes use this as a way of getting around issues by simply saying, what happens after we both leave our body? Next time we meet, what would it be like? Will you remember these petty differences you have? Do you have to wait until you die and are reborn in a new body so that you can be friends again? How silly. If finally that's the truth of our relationship, throw out the differences right now. Die now and be born right now. Much simpler, isn't it? At every moment you take a new birth, review, recast all your relationships, set aside all those silly misunderstandings. On a practical level, you keep in awareness the fact that there are certain limitations, there are issues of communication, language, capacity, incapacity, confused intentions in everyone. But you can move forward and be reborn and be true to your own deeper truth. And so you begin to view everything and everyone in terms of this deeper truth of one divine presence working through so many centers of consciousness, souls, and all our relationships are to be seen from that vision. Even when in the heat of battle you have to kill the enemy, you do not lose sight of the fact that this is a divine soul inhabiting a body. Whatever the circumstance of the body and the distortion in which it has to work, well, you have to get rid of the distortion. You respect the soul and the presence within each. And so it will be even for other sentient creatures and beings, animals, plants, animals, you will still view as brothers and sisters, children of the one divine, at different levels of evolution. And finally, in your mind, in your thought, remind yourself that there is one universal mind. Just as there is one life working through so many centers, there is one mind working through so many minds. And every viewpoint is justified from its exclusive position. If I go to a telescope and look through it, my whole world is that little circle of the image I see. If I look at a different telescope pointing in a different direction, the whole universe is that little patch that is seen through it. Yes, it's justified, but it's incomplete. Can I see through all telescopes and recognize the value of each of them while still keeping my focus in activity? So when you begin to think in these terms, somebody has a rigid viewpoint, you acknowledge, yes, this is justified, but it is not enough. You don't start by saying, you are wrong, I am right. And the question is now how to widen the telescopes of view, how to broaden the perspective so that we can all align to some extent on the portion that we have to work together. There is no wrong or right, there is only knowledge, increasing perspective, widening your perspective. Anything which is limited is wrong and limited, that's all. The three things Sri Aurobindo speaks of, three sins, he says. misapplication. First is ignorance. You're not aware. Okay, disease. Okay, first he puts dis-ease. First sin. Because we are not in harmony with things. What is dis-ease? Something is working. And what it's doing is right in itself. Your heart wants to beat faster, fine, it can beat faster. The problem is, its fast beating is affecting something else. The blood pressure is too high, it is causing capillary burst in the brain. There's a misalignment, a disharmony between elements. If each piece does what it wants, and the whole becomes chaotic. So dis-ease is a lack of harmony, lack of alignment between pieces. Bring them in orientation. Each becoming aware of each other will help to bring orientation. In a group activity, becoming aware of the needs and perspectives of the other, their sense of priorities, allows you to, in your deeper and wider understanding, to form a greater harmony. And then you are no more a diseased group, but a healthy group. So you can see it on many levels. In your own person, as a person, you are diseased because your mind goes one way, your heart goes another way, and your body goes in a different way, and they have each their moods and cycles. Bring awareness, realign, and things become harmonious and healthy. The second sin is ignorance. After realigning yourself, you are still incomplete because you do not know what is greater, what is beyond. And so, broaden the perspective, understand other visions, other angles. Often, you cannot even imagine what it's like to think differently. You're so fixated in your own view, and it takes a little bit of effort. If you can make that effort, you'll often be surprised at how differently human beings think, often across cultures, but even within cultures. And this can be done in many ways. One of the forms is through reading. Reading of rich literature. And you begin to different values, and that enriches you. If you enjoy that, that's one way. Cinema is one way of living somebody else's life. But take things which you find uplifting and healthy, but not wasteful for your purpose of growth. But at some point, when you're sufficiently flexible, through an interaction with a person, you can feel in how differently they are oriented. And you can very quickly absorb these different approaches. If your mind is then over time trained to become flexible, the process becomes much faster. So the ignorance will be overcome at a very practical level by exposing yourself, widening yourself. But you start with the concept that every viewpoint represents a truth and you have something to learn from it. And the rest follows. Ask for help when you don't know. Instead of saying, I am right and trying harder, you say, help me to broaden, help me to see. And the knowledge comes, is given to you because you opened yourself to receive it. And the third is a wrong application. The third sin is wrong application. You tried to help. Let's say my classmate can't do his homework. I try to help. Wrong application. He is forever dependent on receiving answers or copying from someone. Instead, I assist him to shift viewpoints, to see the way I'm seeing it, until he gets it, and then he can find his own answers. But the same applies in all kinds of contexts of life. And how do you make the right application? Often in a situation of conflict or tension, we tend to assert ourselves more violently, as if by breaking down the other, we will find harmony by suppressing one extreme. And it doesn't work if the other is just as strong. It works only if you are able to find some point of commonality and if both can collaborate. It's a complex story, but the point is you have to find the right application. And often when we find right application, a tiny nudge is able to create a large ripple effect and everything falls into place. But finding that is difficult. The way it is most easily done is either there's an intuition from above, or there is a subtle feel which comes from the deeper psychic influence. You look at the situation. If you are temperamentally prone to thinking and trying out many things or with fixed ideas, well, exercise your thoughts and analysis, look at every angle. And having exhausted all angles, now stop thinking and become very quiet. And then try to feel deep within what feels right. Not in the emotions, but in the silence of the heart, where the psychic influence can come forward. And you'll find after a while something feels right, something doesn't feel right. And you flow a little bit in the direction which feels right. And again pause, and flow, and pause. And it as if navigates you through life. Or if you're able to open above, simply a flash and it's obvious, this is how it should be. And then with it comes also the impulse that flows. So these are various ways in which one can put into practice the overall approach which is intended, even long before we have awakened to the underlying consciousness of oneness. But through these means, indirectly, this is what you're working towards, to build this foundation in which your own littleness opens out, grows into the larger oneness, in which these things become spontaneous, effortless. We'll pause here and open to questions or comments. Okay. You want me to read it out? Okay. Here's his question: if all originates from the omni-loving, conscious Supreme Being, how do you explain that everything is utterly false down here on earth? Why the life of the people is so narrow and miserable? How do you justify all these horrors, suffering, torture, etc.? How do you account for selfishness, hate, greed, etc.? How do you justify the fact that the individual's own... Yes, no, I got the point. Yes, and poverty. Why is the delightful presence so ambiguous? So, this really goes to the core of the question of suffering, ignorance, evil, etc. And the answer really is, when you look at the things from a deeper perspective, you realize that all these are appearances. Yes, I got this. Power play. You realize these are appearances. The analogy of a play in which each actor plays out a part is something which gives us some sense of what happens. You dress up as one side of the player, another dresses up as another. You play at this struggle, and at the end of the play, behind the curtain, you shake hands and say, what a good performance it was. Something like that is taking place at the level of the soul's growth, behind the curtain. For the soul, this is a domain of exploration and enjoyment, full of surprises and deceits and traps including, where the delight can conceal itself and play at not being delight. Behind the appearance, there is only delight. In the appearance, there is the appearance of suffering. And the examples we took earlier, which there is a larger picture across time, where through this struggle we are reawakening to the delight that is already present and the freedom that we already have. But in the first movement, there is the descent, the plunge into self-loss, when the universe is pouring out, entering the game, accepting to be bound by the rules. If you look at the game of football, you could ask yourself, well, why do they keep kicking the ball again and again? Why do they keep going back and forth? Why can't they just come together and decide, let's pick up the ball and put it in this goal? Why not break the rules of the game, lift it with your hand and throw it? Well, the whole point of the game was to work within limitations. Otherwise there would be no game. So we accept to set a certain pattern of limitations, and then through those limitations play out certain possibilities. And so the soul from its poise has chosen to enter a play of possibilities. And one of the greatest joys is the joy of self-discovery. And the greatest joy of self-discovery is when you can experience complete self-loss and from there recover complete self. So the spectrum of the play is the full extreme, from one extreme to the other. You plunge into complete self-loss and through there you find your journey back to complete self-discovery in the Satchidananda. If you look at the big picture across a few billion years, you see this journey. What happens in the later half, when you awaken to the reality of your Satchidananda, is so blissful and so beautiful that the struggle is justified. When you look at a patch in between of a single human lifetime, then you see the misery and struggle on the surface, through which you grow. Cut short the struggle, and you would not have the need to grow and discover yourself. If you remove the pain that causes a person to want to grow more, he would be just satisfied in living as they are, which you see often in the animal kingdom. Unchallenged, there is a status quo. You're happy to stay as you are. Challenged by a difficulty, you make the effort to grow and rise above. So in the initial phase of the evolution, which is unconscious, it is through struggle and pain that we grow. From the phase where we enter and become conscious, then it is to conscious choice and the delight of that choice that we grow. And there's a transitional phase when you're half here, half there. That's the current situation of humanity. The second point is that the divine completeness in expression is not just sweetness and love and joy, it is also strength and power. And what you see in the world today is the undeveloped character of power in the light. Where there is light, people are good, they are weak or not strong enough. Where you see darkness, it has worked on the aspect of power much more. And so in the balance of power, the dark tends to dominate the light until the light awakens to the need of expressing the divine power also. And at that point, the dark would be overcome once and for all. So any strife, any conflict points to a lack of something undeveloped and compels that development. If you were to be able to identify with your soul and look at the struggle of these apparent sufferings of life, you would say, wow, that was such a rich experience. If right now you had the memory of having passed through some of the terrible passages of human development, you would still say, oh, those were terrible. But what a rich learning experience. How much I grew through that period when we had to fight to survive, and so on. So the perspective is very different from the soul. It's only on the surface that these things appear. Increasingly, as we awaken to that influence, that underlying delight begins to fill us, even as on the surface we may be struggling. And then we do not view the struggle as a struggle anymore, but as a learning process. Any other comments or questions?
This Sat Chit Anand, though these are three words, are they the dimensions of the same thing?
Yes.
Or differentiated?
In the oneness of the divine consciousness, it is pure awareness that exists as bliss. It's one thing. But as it moves to express, the existence, awareness, bliss can be experienced as different shades of the same one thing, isn't it? And so it's possible to view them as separate, but in the oneness of the experience, there's no separateness. It is one thing with many shades and characters, infinite qualities, infinite possibilities. That's what makes for the world which is so wonderful. The character of the world is that it is full of surprises, full of new possibilities. Anything can emerge out of anything else because everything is hidden inside everything.
These three facets of the same principle
Yes.
have an effect of time and space.
Sorry?
Have an effect of time and space on them.
I didn't understand the question.
These three facets, are they affected by the time and space?
Why do you ask this? What is the question for you? What is bothering you in this?
Means Satchidanand, does it yield to time and space?
Does it?
Yield to time and space.
It is the creator of time and space. Look at it this way. In your mind, let's say you are the writer, you are the creator of a novel. In your mind, you create characters. You create a storyline. Where do they exist? In your oneness. Every character is yourself. Every event is yourself. Are they separate? In your mind, they are identical. But in that identity, there are different facets or different poises of your mind. Okay? I can be Romeo, I can be Juliet. I can also be Shakespeare at the same time. They are one, but different in their oneness. Next, as your mind moves to express, it puts them in relation, puts them in a sequence. And that's what creates the sense of time unfolding. You put them in arrangement, it creates the sense of space between them. Romeo lives 1 kilometer from Juliet. You've created the extension of separation in between. What is in between? You fill that gap with so many other houses. You unfold in the sequence of time their relationship. They meet, they spend over a few years to know each other. Okay? So the whole thing in your mind is like all the possibilities being organized in relationship to each other creates a sense of space and time. When you enter into one particular character, you are like in this body with space and time. But when you step back into the larger oneness, the space and time is within you. You are its creator, and it is your field, so to say, for manifesting the play of forms. That's why we see time itself is nothing but the will of the divine flowing as a power. Space is nothing but the breast of the Lord on which the universe plays out. There's this image of the Shakti dancing on the chest of the Lord, isn't it? That's the poise of the space expansion on which things move, the energy flows. Yes.
For example, if a man possesses infinite power, if a man influences another person Does he possess infinite power over him?
Okay. If you influence only, no, you don't need infinite power for that.
Okay.
Because what you're influencing, let's say this flower,
Okay.
you can lift it, you can put it in the water, or you can tear it. You don't need infinite power for that, isn't it?
Yeah.
But the power working inside you is infinite. You're using a small portion of it. The power working in the flower is infinite. But the amount of energy the flower gives out in heat is very small, finite. So look at it this way. If you have an ocean, let's say an infinite ocean, out of the infinite ocean a wave comes. The wave is small. You can even catch the wave in a bowl of water,
Yeah.
in the bowl.
Yeah.
It's finite. But the water from which it comes is infinite.
Yeah.
Okay? So in the fish which is in the ocean, the fish opens its mouth, swallows water. It swallowed a finite piece, but the water itself is infinite. Even when it is in the stomach of the fish, it is part of the ocean. Right? In the fish blood, it is the same ocean flowing as blood. Now we are like that. We think we are this piece, we think we are eating a small piece of food, everything is finite. But actually the food is part of the infinity. We are part of the infinity. And as we eat food, it is only the infinite, a part of the infinite which is flowing in a part of the infinite. And the reality behind is always infinite. Okay? So in all human relations, you can exercise an influence, but you are exercising a small finite part of what is infinite. But as you grow and become one and experience the infinity, you can put that small part, but behind it will be the full power of the infinite, consciously. And that is why a yogi can point with his finger and move a mountain. Potentially. He puts his hand like that, and the plane which is crashing is protected and saved. But the hand is not holding the plane. The power flowing through is from the infinite source, and it can support as much as necessary.
Second World War.
Yes.
The World War took a sudden change.
Yes.
Due to
So when the yogi is able to exercise from a higher level, the power that he can exercise is so much greater, far greater than what the physical body could have contained in a physical process. Because your consciousness is now one with the infinite, it can draw from it as needed. Our basic problem is our finiteness. When we identify with body limitation, I have only so many liters of blood in my body and so many calories in my blood, and therefore I have only so much energy that I can exercise. You can't do more, right? There's a very simple technique which is taught in pranayama, with which you can draw energy from the universe directly. With that technique, you can heat the body, you can generate heat in the body until you can stay without feeling cold, bare-bodied in the snow. So a person who has developed this capacity can sleep in the snow in the Himalayas, bare-bodied, walk for days together in the snow, bare-bodied, without eating food, and the biology will not have enough calories to produce the heat. But he is not drawing on the body, he is drawing on the energy directly from the infinite source. Drawing finite, but still he has access to the infinite energy. So we have to recognize, because we tend to identify with the body, we limit ourselves in energy and even in thought. I am only capable of this much because this is my form. When you step back from the body identification, your awareness is wide. You can feel yourself one with the whole room. You can extend yourself, and without much effort, basically feel yourself one with the whole earth, or even extend in awareness, mind awareness only. Conceive of the whole universe. And a part of your mind actually links to the whole universe. And it's not just your imagination, it's the truth. When you're aware of it like that, you're holding something. And it's accessible right now as you are. So don't make the error to think you are just this. You are all that, appearing in this little form. And as you begin to open yourself more and more to the awareness of all that, the possibilities within you also grow. And remember, the body becomes what? Mold of the spirit, a vehicle for all manifestation of the light force and joy of Satchidananda. It's just a focal point through which all those possibilities will flow through. That is your life. Everything you do in your life is just a little bit of all those possibilities flowing through. You think of it this way. Yes, yes. Even in healing, the thing is, when you try to heal somebody, you can put your own energy. You will be depleted. Or you can draw from a universal force which flows through you, then you are not depleted. You are energized as the other person is energized.
Shradhalji, one question. So you give an example, right? What elders say, be satisfied. That gave a connect to one of Panditji's articles in Mother's Ministry book. Where he says, this is what people will say, but you have to grow or think about growth. Now what happens is, to your point, there is a slight line between desire and trying to grow, right? Panditji would have naturally meant trying to grow and achieve perfection. Now, how do you know the difference sometimes? Let's say I'm a clerk, I want to become a head clerk.
Yes.
I cannot just think I'll be satisfied being a clerk.
The reality of desire in you, you cannot ignore. It arises in you as an instinct nature has embedded for this purpose, so that you may grow. Now, instead of fulfilling desire for the impulse that comes in the moment, I need more ice cream, you turn the desire, knowing its real purpose, towards your growth. Yes, I will eat ice cream also, as a way of strengthening my body, as a form of enjoying something tasty in my food, as a form of enjoying the possibilities of the play of life, as a means of growth. So initially, you do not ignore the truth of desire. It is there. It is embedded in the biology, even in all the levels of our being. You align it. And you distinguish between the form of the desire, one form and another. Fulfilling desire for the sake of fulfilling desire for the sake of greater growth. And so you're using a built-in impulse and turning it towards the divine. And the result is, there's no internal conflict, no internal struggle. All in you moves parallelly. And the growth is much faster. Very soon you realize the desire itself is not what you thought it was. It was what came as desire initially was just a mask. Behind it was always the deeper truth of the soul's aspiration. Organized in your biology and your emotions as an impulse. But as you align it more and more to the soul's aspiration, that fills and guides the desire impulse. And then we use the word, the desire nature is purified. Meaning now it serves the deeper truth of its origin rather than the habit of its instinct of the past. And then ceases to be a distinction. You can even use the word desire with a capital D to mean a divine desire, but it's no more the selfish or instinctive desire.
Yes, thank you.
If there is no right and wrong and there is just an expansion, then where's the question of wrong action?
Okay. If you ask yourself, what in the forest is wrong? When you look at the tiger eating the deer, is it wrong or right? There's a problem, right?
I'm going to interrupt because it's very interesting you use the forest because I'm working in the forest and I'm weeding and I'm asking myself this question, is this right action or not?
Yes.
And it's very difficult to answer because these weeds are throttling the little saplings, but in the bigger picture, I don't know.
Yes. So in the forest, because there's a natural rhythm where everything serves something greater, and you're able to see what it serves. And the instinct in nature's working in the animals and plants is so harmonized that everything is somehow spontaneously under balance and serving each other. The problem is when the human mind enters the forest and says, I will help to improve this. And it comes with a limited knowledge, and generally what it interferes to do tends to spoil the balance. Second, human desire entering the forest, saying, I will kill elephants to sell the tusk, and destroys. For what? To fulfill a moment's greed. So these are the two impulses coming from humanity which spoil and create the right and wrong question. Right and wrong as a concept does not exist until the mind comes into play. Life has a spontaneous flow. So, having got mind, of course, right and wrong does exist. But it can be seen from a narrow perspective or a larger perspective. So there is something which may be wrong in a narrow perspective, but in a larger perspective may serve a greater good. Often this is what happens in the case of natural disasters. One wishes they didn't happen, but having happened, it can be used for, let's say, rebuilding or deeper collaboration among people, etc. And recently a friend shared how when in Madras they had floods, the whole river overflowed and filled the city, and it was out of human error. They just opened the sluice gates for political reasons, it was delayed, and then the city flooded. It was ridiculous. But when that happened, suddenly there was no food and no transport. You had to move around in boats, literally. Everybody came together and helped each other. It didn't matter what background you were, what culture, what religion, what tradition, what name. Everybody worked together. The waters receded and everyone fell apart. You can say even that the disaster served to awaken some deeper unity momentarily and prepare you for something greater eventually. So one can see something good even in what seems to be superficially bad or wrong. There is only one perspective in this. All that helps to grow towards greater truth, beauty, love, harmony, knowledge is good. All that takes you away from these is harmful or delays evolution, that's about all. But it can still enrich. So in the way Sri Aurobindo articulates, there's this saying, everything happens for the best. He says, no, that's not true. All that happens does not happen for the best. But having happened, the divine makes the best use of it, which is the nature of this creation, which is something so amazing. It does not matter what happens. Out of that, somehow, the divine can pull out the best possibilities and use it as a means for speeding up evolution. So this is the big picture. Now when it comes to actually weeding, in nature, if you see the role of weeds, what is it that we hate about weeds? They're so stubborn. You can take them out, they'll come back. And that's exactly what nature has intended them to do. They are meant precisely to come into areas where nothing can grow, prepare the ground and soften it so that later other plants can come who are not capable of doing what the weeds are capable of doing. It's like in human beings, you enter the most difficult territory, you have to break the soil, you have to prepare the ground, fertilize it, etc. Then those who are less strong can come and be comfortable there. So the weeds are the forerunners, they capture the destroyed territory and make it ready for the rest. But over a few decades. The human being comes and says, but I want to grow my food here. The weeds are coming in the way. Kill the weeds with poison. Except the poison goes back into your own food. And you'll see precisely where you have destroyed the earth, the weeds come. They are the most hardy. Because they're reclaiming what you have destroyed to purify and prepare it for the rest of the forest eventually to spread. So our understanding of nature's working was partial, and so we didn't know our right relation with the weed. If we can set right our right relation, we will know where we can assist nature's process. And it's a good thing to assist. Some places you will want to de-weed, but maybe in a different way. Some places you will want to encourage weeds because it will serve something else. But really it means you start by observing what nature wants to do and create a relationship of collaboration. I was in a meeting in Europe recently with the Climate Change UN Summit. There was a presentation by a group from Switzerland, and they were saying with a lot of analysis, they said, now the glaciers are melting and lakes are forming where they should not form because there is human habitation. And for a moment I stopped. I said, what do you mean they should not form? Because you have gone there first, and then you have melted the glaciers, and nature finds obviously to put water where you have the most natural valley. You are saying, nature, you should not do this. Shouldn't you rather rethink and say, all right, this is nature's comfort, we should move our housing to a different place, isn't it? The same thing happened recently when there were floods, Katrina in the US. They said an entire township was pretty much destroyed, would have to be rebuilt for so many billions of dollars in the same place. And I said to myself, what a silly thing. You just had nature show you she is going to bring waters here. With rising sea level, it's going to happen. Why are you foolish enough to rebuild in the same place? You should move higher up. But we are not thinking. We are thinking of always opposing nature and conquering nature, not realizing that she's far bigger than us. And she is, as a mother, she allows us to play around like this for a while, but eventually. And the correct relation would be to step back from the narrow little personal perspective and look at the big picture of nature's rhythms and align ourselves to that. And it's not difficult. This was being done by all the old cultures, all over the world. It's only in the modern context with a rational, individualized, desire-driven, greed-based civilization that we have broken this balance. And it can be corrected easily. It means people like you who love the forest, you feel, and then you will be guided. Ask nature and you'll be helped. She'll actually give you an answer. She'll show you in many ways, sometimes through symbols, suggestions, sometimes even through a direct message. We had an African chief who had gone into nature. This was their way, he said. 3 days he's in nature with this one question: how do we set right? And he got an answer in a voice which came with a powerful, loud voice. And it said, the word was, he said, he was looking for the source of the problem. And so he got a voice which said, I don't remember the second word, it was genetic experimentation, genetic modification, that was the word. And he didn't know what it meant. He had to go back and look up what is genetic modification. And he discovered all the mess that's being happening with genetically modified foods. But he got it in the form of a voice also. But generally these things come more as an intuition and a feel. You're in a space and you feel what nature wants to do and you flow with it. This is coming up more and more in the concept of what is called permaculture. But basically it's what the old cultures had been doing when they were aligned to nature. Yes. 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 And this is an amazing point in history that nature has accepted to collaborate in the divine manifestation. And that means we have help. It's not something human beings are doing. Nature, rather than going on through a slow process, has accepted to move forward rapidly in assisting this new awakening of possibilities. Yes. Yes. That's a beautiful example. In the cyclone, 1,500 trees fell in Oroville, did not hurt any person. So that's the collaboration of nature, but it takes other forms also where nature is assisting in developing new possibilities. Even where earlier plants would not grow, nature is assisting in helping the plants to grow. Strange things are happening now. You'll find some plants which would never grow in the auroral space are able to grow. What happened? Nature's impulse in the plant, shifting, modifying, you will see by nature. But she modified the life processes in the plant to make them adapt to the new space. And many things are happening all over the world where there's shifts taking place in nature's balance. It's happening very quickly, neutralizing human interventions and rebuilding in new rhythms rapidly. Yes, very much. Yes. True. He's quoting from the Life Divine. The logic of the infinite is the magic of the finite. Yes.
Shadalu, about this three sin, or is disease and the three sins.
Yes.
Why Sri Aurobindo he called them sin? Why sin?
So the idea is, his position was there is no such thing as sin. There is no such thing as sin. There are only these three things which create the appearance of sin. Because he's countering the religious teachings that there is a kind of a sin which is fundamental to life or to human existence. And he says there is no such thing. There are only these things which make for us to suffer. But there is no such thing like in the church teaching, and I don't call it Christianity, the churchianity. In the church teaching, there is this idea that there is some fundamental sin which binds you and you can't help it, you're stuck with it for no fault of yours. Which doesn't make sense. Not only it's irrational, it has no meaning, it makes the whole universe quite pointless, except as a prison for someone to punish. But if you look behind that, the sense that we have that something is wrong comes from these things, these limitations, which are part of the growing consciousness struggling to find its completeness, really. And in the passage it looks like that these things are.
Yeah, you spoke about reviewing and remoulding. What I perceived it as is reviewing is more of the conceptual understanding. It could be breaking of the hypnosis and realigning changing our perception to what is created, what is out here and what is out there.
Yes.
But what is remoulding is actually aligning things to where things belong and how things are integrated together and how they can work together. So what I face here is reviewing is conceptually understanding and remoulding is putting things to action. In the practice that we do in our daily life, there's a joy of understanding. But when we know that they have to be put in action, there's amount of delay. Maybe it is because the amount of practice that needs to go in and etc. For many reasons. We could be lazy, we could be anything. But that what causes this delay and what are the things which are behind this delay? One thing what I could think of is there, this is another question. Second part of the question is there anything called as resistance from the lower, which could be bringing up these kind of causes to the delay? If not, what is it that is causing?
The first problem is you know something and then you say you have to act by it. The first problem is that the knowledge and the action you have separated. Okay? I can study and know how to do a perfect cartwheel or somersault. But when I start doing it, that knowing of the logic or the physics of it is useless. What I need is knowing in the body. If my body knows the feel of a perfect somersault, I do it. You see, the knowing and the doing is not separated anymore, it's one. As long as you make that separation, you'll always have a problem in applying. So in the spiritual change, the first correction we do is the knowing is what becomes the doing. It's no more an intellectual knowing of the formula or the mental understanding, but it is a knowing in the very nature of who you are and what you are. So you start with, for example, the sense of the perception of the unity, whatever exercises we spoke of. Let's say you make it your practice to begin to view all beings as souls in evolution, concealed perhaps, covered up, whatever. And the personality is confused, but within it is the divine spark. You bow down to the spark, but to the personality you do what has to be done, including give them a knock if needed. You don't do it out of personal hate anymore because you recognize that. Let's say you start with the idea. Very quickly the idea becomes a living reality to you because you feel the truth of it. Now this is true because the living truth of it was already inside, and by turning your idea you aligned yourself to it, and so it could come forward. You can't do this with just any idea. I could imagine as an idea that everybody is actually a robot controlled by a computer sitting under the earth. I can try to picture that, but it will lead to nothing real other than an idea, because there's no truth behind. So we are seeking the truth behind, for which you align the thinking, and then the truth gets a chance to flow into that reoriented mold of your mind. Because it is already there, it fills. And as it fills, automatically your behavior changes. When somebody is insulting towards you, rather than getting upset, you say, "Oh, poor fellow, he's so confused. He's so clouded in his confusion." You don't get upset anymore, because now this is a living truth for you. So the whole goal for us is to bring forward this knowledge which is lived. By aligning our thought first, when he speaks of this review, in the review you have only created a condition for the truth which is deeper within you to come forward and fill. Because we are so warped on the surface, the truth comes only in fits and pieces, and even then what comes is often twisted. It's light coming through a reflected mirror, so to say. You ever looked at there's this glazed windows? You can see things outside, you can see a vague form, but you can't see who it is. Something like that here within. By making the crystal transparent, the glass transparent, what is inside now comes through. And that's all that we are doing here. So in reading this and studying a text like this, not only because you are being reoriented here, but there is this awakening of a deep resonance felt inside. Feel that and let that grow. And that's when the remolding begins to happen. The whole essence of the yogic transformation, the remolding, is by opening yourself to that which is already it and allowing its influence to fill and reshape. There's not you trying to pretend to be something, but you opening to allow the truth to flow through it. There are people who have tried, one guy at the ashram, for example, long ago. He would he would stand at the gate of his house, and anybody passing by, he would call them and hug them and say, "I'm trying to be universal man, so I have to hug everybody." So that's a pretense. You're only constructing, there's no truth to it. When you feel it in your heart, because at first you begin by perceiving, when you begin to feel it in your heart, you're already hugging them. You don't need to reach out and... But you get the idea. Really the orientation is to bring forward that which is, and then it happens. And it's spontaneous. The beauty of the integral yoga is if you follow this movement, since you're aligned with what is true, the truth has always greater force than falsehood. Since you've aligned with the truth flows spontaneously, almost effortlessly. Your only effort is to remain aligned with it. And so you grow from joy to greater joy. And that's why the mother calls it the sunlit path. And the sooner you align yourself to the deep influence of the soul within the psychic being, the more natural everything begins to happen and smooth and spontaneous. And the whole journey is from joy to greater joy. Anytime you experience struggle or suffering, be sure you're making a mistake. And often the error is because some part in you is not functioning as you think it should. I have jealousy, so I try to fight it and suppress it and deny it, and then you get into trouble. Instead, you kind of uncover the truth behind. What is the jealousy pointing to? I see someone who is able to do this and I cannot. Instead of being jealous, I turn it into an inspiration. Wow, it can be done. If they can do, I can also do it. Instead of being jealous, it becomes a source of inspiration. Instead of fighting a knot, you untie the knot. And the result is the threads are laid out as clear streams. This is the image Sri Aurobindo uses to distinguish the path of the integral yoga from the ascetic traditions, where the knot of human nature, they cut or they tear painfully. That is the ascetic way. He says, here we untie and the threads fall into place to form a beautiful tapestry. Everything within you is essentially, in its origin, a divine impulse, now distorted. And our work really is to allow it to fall into place. In the Ishopanishad, the last verse is this prayer to Agni. Conceive of Agni as the soul, the flame of the divine presence within. And it says, lead us from the crooked path. The current movement is crooked. And you align yourself to that, and in the light of that, things fall into place and become straight. And there's a laminar smooth flow. And the journey becomes joyous and effortless. Reading this helps to awaken and draw forward that which he is describing. We will end with this and continue after 3 weeks. In gratitude to the clarity that Sri Aurobindo brings and the perspective that he offers, which is without which life is so confusing, so full of contradictory truths. And Sri Aurobindo puts them all in clarity, and it's so natural and you can feel the truth of it. Before we leave, yesterday was the birthday of Sri M.P. Pandit, about which I had mentioned last time, and we distributed 2 messages on that occasion, and we will keep them here for you to take. It's been kept already for you to take on the way out, if you have not already had it, and I think you will find it inspiring.